Have you ever walked into a place that should have felt completely ordinary, but something about it felt strangely wrong? Maybe you have stood in an empty school corridor after dark, walked through a deserted shopping centre, seen an abandoned swimming pool, or found yourself alone in a hotel hallway late at night. Nothing is necessarily frightening. There may be no obvious danger, and yet you feel it. That sensation that something is different. As though the place is familiar, but somehow unfamiliar at the same time. As though you stepped into a world that looks almost exactly like your own, but follows slightly different rules. You might even experience a peculiar feeling of nostalgia for somewhere you have never been. This is the strange phenomenon known as liminal space. But perhaps there is more to liminal spaces than simply empty rooms and unsettling photographs. Possibly they fascinate us because, on a deeper level, they reflect something within ourselves. The word liminal comes from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold, and a threshold is a fascinating thing. It is neither one room nor the other. It is the place between them. When you stand in a doorway, you are technically still in one space while already entering another. A threshold represents transition, and this is the essence of liminality. To be liminal is to exist between states, between what was and what is yet to come, between one identity and another, between certainty and uncertainty, between the familiar and the unknown. And perhaps this is why certain places can affect us so deeply. We recognize them, but something is missing. A railway station without passengers, an airport without travellers, a school without children, a hotel corridor with every light switched on, but not a single person anywhere, a playground at night, a swimming pool with water perfectly still, a supermarket after closing time. These places were designed for movement, noise, and human activity. When that activity disappears, something peculiar happens. The architecture remains exactly where it was. The lights still glow. The doors are still there. The chairs remain in their places. The signs still tell us where we are. But the human presence has vanished. And suddenly, something ordinary becomes uncanny. Our brains are remarkably good at recognizing patterns. We know what a school should sound like. We know what an airport should feel like. We know what a shopping centre should look like when people are moving through it. When we encounter the same environment without the activity we associate with it, our expectations are violated. The result can be an unsettling mixture of familiarity and unfamiliarity. It is familiar enough for us to recognize, but unfamiliar enough to make us question what we are seeing. And perhaps this explains why liminal spaces can produce such complicated emotions. They are not always frightening. Sometimes they are beautiful. Sometimes they are peaceful. Sometimes they are deeply nostalgic. And sometimes they can make you feel strangely sad. You may look at a photograph of an empty playground and suddenly remember childhood. You may see an old hotel corridor and feel as though you have been there before, even though you know you haven't. You may look at an empty swimming pool and experience a strange longing for a memory that doesn't actually belong to you. It is almost as though the image has unlocked something that was already hidden somewhere inside your mind. And this is where things become particularly interesting. Because liminality is not simply an internet aesthetic. The idea of liminality existed long before people began posting mysterious photographs of empty corridors online. Anthropologists have used the concept to describe periods of transition in human life. Arnold van Gennep famously explored transitional stages surrounding rituals and important changes in identity. Later, anthropologist Victor Turner developed the idea of the liminal state further. A person entering a rite or passage might temporarily exist between identities. They are no longer who they were, but they have not yet become who they will be. They are in between, and that in-between state can be mysterious, uncertain, and transformative. Think about how many experiences in life actually resemble this. There can be a period between childhood and adulthood, between leaving one home and finding another, between ending one relationship and beginning a new chapter, between losing an old identity and discovering a new one, between knowing exactly what you believe and realizing that everything you once believed may need to be reconsidered. These periods can be uncomfortable, but they can also be incredibly powerful, because when the old version of your life has disappeared, but the new version has not yet taken shape, you enter a kind of psychological liminal space. You are standing on the threshold, and possibly this is one reason why liminal imagery can feel so emotionally powerful. We are not simply looking at an empty corridor, we are looking at a visual representation of something we have all experienced. The feeling of being between worlds. There is another fascinating aspect to this. Many ancient cultures placed enormous importance on thresholds. Doorways, gates, crossroads, caves, bridges, and borders often carried symbolic meanings. They were places where one thing became another. A doorway could represent the boundary between the known and unknown. A cave could represent entering the darkness and emerging transformed. A crossroads could represent a moment of choice. A bridge could represent passage from one state to another. Even in mythology, the threshold is rarely just a physical location. It often represents a psychological or spiritual transition. And presumably, this is why the image of the doorway appears so often in stories about magic, dreams, and the supernatural. The doorway is the simplest symbol of entering somewhere else. You leave one environment behind and cross into another. The old world is on one side, the unknown on the other, and you are standing directly between them. The idea also appears in dreams. Dreams themselves can feel profoundly liminal. You can be somewhere that seems completely real, even though the laws of reality have changed. You may recognize a house that doesn't exist. You may walk through a city you have never visited, while somehow knowing exactly where you are. You may meet people you have never seen before, but feel that you have known them forever. The dream world occupies its own strange territory, between conscious awareness and unconscious experience. Quite possibly, this is why liminal spaces sometimes feel dreamlike. They activate something very similar. They take an ordinary environment and remove enough of its expected context that it begins to resemble the logic of a dream. And then there is the phenomenon of déjà vu, that particular feeling that you have experienced something before. You enter a room and suddenly feel that you have already been there. You walk down a street and experience an inexplicable familiarity. You hear a sound and feel transported somewhere else. Science has explanations for déjà vu, involving memory and the way the brain processes familiarity. But the emotional experience itself can feel incredibly mysterious. And when déjà vu occurs within a liminal environment, the sensation can become even stronger. It can feel as though you have briefly stepped through a crack in ordinary reality. This may help explain the fascination with photographs of places that appear almost real, but somehow impossible. The internet has given this phenomenon a particularly famous form through what is known as the backrooms. The backrooms began as an internet horror concept based around an image of an endless, strangely familiar yellow interior. There are no obvious people, no clear destination, no reassuring explanation, just seemingly endless rooms. The horror comes largely from the uncertainty. Where are you? How did you get there? Where does the corridor lead? And possibly, most importantly, why does this place feel so familiar? The back rooms transformed the idea of liminal space into a form of digital mythology. But underneath the horror is something much older. The fear of becoming lost between worlds. The fear of entering somewhere without knowing how to leave. The fear of crossing a threshold and discovering that you cannot return to the place you came from. And conceivably, this is why liminal spaces can be so fascinating, even when they are not frightening. They represent possibility. A doorway can lead somewhere terrifying, but it can also lead somewhere extraordinary. A crossroads can represent confusion, but it can also represent freedom. An empty room can represent loneliness, but it can also represent a blank page. And an unfamiliar path can represent danger, but it can also represent transformation. Maybe this is why some liminal spaces feel strangely peaceful. An empty beach before sunrise, a deserted train station in the early morning, a quiet hotel corridor, a mist-covered road, a swimming pool illuminated at night. There is something about these environments that temporarily removes us from the ordinary rhythm of life. No crowds, no conversations, no expectations, just silence. And in that silence we become more aware of ourselves. Perchance, liminal spaces are compelling because they give physical form to an emotional experience that is difficult to describe. The feeling of not quite belonging to the world you have left behind, while not yet knowing where you are going next. We often think that uncertainty is something to escape, but transformation requires uncertainty. Before a seed becomes a plant, there is a period hidden beneath the soil. Before dawn, there is darkness. Before a new identity emerges, the old one may have to fall away. And quite possibly the most profound liminal spaces are not physical places at all. They are moments in our lives. The moment before making an important decision. The moment before leaving something behind. The strange period when you realize that you have changed, but nobody else has noticed yet. The moment when an old belief no longer makes sense, but you have not yet discovered what you believe instead. The period when your life appears empty because the things that once filled it have disappeared. The moments can feel frightening because we naturally want certainty. We want to know where we are going. We want to know what happens next. But the liminal state does not provide those answers. It asks us to remain at the threshold, to tolerate the unknown, to allow something new to emerge. Plausibly, this is why the ancient symbolism of thresholds has survived for thousands of years. A threshold represents possibility. You are not trapped in the old world. You have not yet entered the new one. You are standing between them. And potentially, that strange feeling we experience when looking at a liminal space is not simply fear. Maybe part of us recognizes it, because somewhere deep within our own lives, we have all stood in that doorway. We have all been between chapters, between identities, between places, between relationships, between versions of ourselves. And potentially the unsettling emptiness of the liminal space is really a reflection of that moment when the familiar has disappeared and the future has not yet revealed itself. So the next time you find yourself somewhere strangely quiet, somewhere that feels familiar, yet unfamiliar, somewhere that feels suspended outside ordinary time, don't immediately dismiss that feeling. Look around, notice the silence, notice the emptiness, notice the strange sense that you are standing somewhere between one world and another, because maybe you are, not necessarily in a supernatural sense, but symbolically, psychologically, or even spiritually. You are standing on a threshold, and thresholds have always fascinated humanity because we have never truly known what waits on the other side. Presumably, that is what makes liminal spaces so haunting. They remind us that the world we know is not the only way of experiencing reality. Sometimes the most mysterious places are not distant planets, ancient ruins, or forgotten temples. Sometimes they are ordinary places that have somehow become extraordinary. A corridor, a doorway, a staircase, a deserted station, a road disappearing into the mist, a room waiting for someone to enter. Places that exist between one moment and the next, between memory and imagination, between the familiar and the unknown, between what we were and what we are becoming. They are liminal spaces, places on the threshold, and quite possibly, in one way or another, we are all living in one.